Long Canyon was our photographic destination for the better part of the next 2 days. We spent an evening and a morning photographing in Long Canyon, which is along the Burr Trail east of Boulder, Utah, and it's loosely in the area that I call the Escalante region because the whole area is drained by the Escalante River. And Long Canyon is a wonderful place to photograph. It's very diverse. The southern end of the canyon is a little bit more wide open and has a bunch of beautiful cottonwoods, and we concentrated on those quite a bit. And then as the canyon progresses northward, it gets narrower and narrower. And there's very tall walls with beautiful canyon varnish and lots of trees to work on and boulders and just interesting stuff. And probably the highlight of the whole place is a narrow little slot canyon that opens in the wall. It's only maybe 100 yards long. You just walk right in. It's very easy, and it kind of has a one singular iconic shot that everybody tends to take, and I certainly did mine probably over 20 years ago now on my first visit. But it's a beautiful little slot canyon and has some other interesting things to offer as well as the sort of one obvious shot. So we spent a good amount of time there exploring some different possibilities. Another nice thing about Long Canyon is it has a nice paved road and lots of pullouts all along. You can stop your car anywhere and feel safe photographing. There's not a lot of traffic, and so it's really easy to just pull off and set up to shoot wherever you feel like it. So it's very accessible and very nice, comfortable, easy place to photograph, which is always nice. I used both my view camera and my 5DSR on these 2 days depending on the conditions, and got quite a few images that I'm really happy with, so we'll take a look at those now, starting with the digital images. This is a grouping of little cottonwoods that I was describing at the mouth of Long Canyon, and during the sunrise it gets a beautiful reflected light from a cliff that's just behind me, and then you also have a lot of blue from the sky, so it was always a challenge to decide how much of that blue to leave in. When we get to the film images, they definitely go blue, and so I was able to pull some of that out. But the beautiful little plant shrub at the foreground there, they look really blue in the morning light, and it's a really pretty warm, cool contrast that you always like to see in a landscape photo. This little yellow tree sits just inside the mouth of that slot canyon I was describing earlier, and I thought it made a nice counterpoint with this little rock monument, and that was bathed in beautiful warm reflected light there, and just made a nice little vignette that's a little different than sort of the larger scenes that you tend to work on in this area. Another little tree detail just outside the mouth of that little slot canyon, and this one just struck me, these branches coming together, and it just sort of jumped out at me as an interesting abstract. You can see a little bit of the canyon varnish on the wall opposite, but mostly I was just interested in the way these two branches would just come out of the top of the frame and kind of grow together and apart, and I just like the subtle glow of this and just sort of the quiet feeling of this beautifully still canyon. And here are a couple of juniper trees that are growing together, and I like the way they were sort of curving toward each other, reaching toward each other, and then the nice canyon varnish wall in the background. This is catching a nice amount of reflected light, and what I liked about this one was the exposed trunk. You don't often see that. The junipers often are just completely shrouded in their branches and pine needles, but this one has that open side revealing the structure of that tree, and I thought it was nice to see that. Moving on to the film images, this is one I really, really like. I just think this one has quite a story to tell, with this little juniper fitting just in this little cleft of the rock, and then the big walls and stripes going up from that. This one definitely used the view camera movements to keep all those lines parallel and raising the lens enough to be able to frame the image the way I wanted to. I like how the Velvia picked up a lot of the blue sky reflecting on those branches, and once again you get that warm, cool contrast. It was beautiful reflected light being kicked into this cliff, and so I'm really happy with this one. I think it's pretty special for me. I think this is one of my nicest compositions of the trip. This sunset image, again in the southern end of Long Canyon where the cottonwoods are, is really, really special. I think there's, again, a story here with the stately large old tree and then the small one sort of coming up and being sheltered under its branches. So I just love the directional light of the sunset sky that was kicking in, and to me the arrangement is just beautiful here, and this one I'm really proud of. Another sunset image here, very warm light just filling this scene, and I love all the grasses and different colors of tones and hues at the base, and then these interesting trees. So it's just the kind of place you would just like to be. You know, wouldn't you like to just curl up with a good book at the base of that tree, or just, you know, camp there for a few days? And I think that's one of the special things about landscape photography. We can sort of create a sense of place and bring a place that people would like to visit and like to see, and just to be still in those areas. And this one is really like that for me. And finally, here is a sunrise image from that same area, and you can see there are much more cool tones in there from the open blue sky, and the light wasn't quite bouncing strongly yet off the cliff opposite, and also those interesting plants at the bottom. They really look this cool blue-gray color. It's kind of interesting. So again, you get that nice warm, cool contrast that's always fun. And so I really just like the canopy of these trees and how they all just sort of curve up and out. And then you just feel like you'd like to wander among those plants. They look so soft there as you could walk through this scene. And it just seems very comforting and very inviting. Well, that's it for our 2 days in Long Canyon, and I think we did pretty well. It was a really special time, and I got quite a few images I'm really happy with. So I hope you enjoyed seeing Long Canyon as much as I enjoyed being there and bringing it to you, and I really appreciate you sticking with this series so far. There's definitely more episodes to come. We're headed back to Zion, where we'll finish the trip, so look forward to that, and we'll see you on the next one. So I had kind of a negative experience the other day. A couple of days ago, my friends and I were over in the Escalante area, and we were driving through and photographing in Long Canyon. In Long Canyon, there's this neat little slot canyon. It's like a couple 100 feet long, and that's it. I visited this thing a number of times and have a pretty nice image from a number of years ago, but it's always fun to give it another try. So I set up the camera and looked at the image, but the light wasn't quite right, and so I didn't take a picture. Well, when I was packing up, I set my dark cloth up on the kind of a crevice in the wall while I was packing everything else up, because the dark cloth's the last thing that goes in the bag. And for whatever reason, I didn't look around and I didn't grab that dark cloth. I packed up and took off out of that little slot canyon and rejoined my friends, and we kept on driving down Long Canyon and looking for photographs. Well, sometime later, when I found the next picture I wanted to make, and I unpacked my gear to set up, I noticed the dark cloth wasn't there. So, of course, you know, I'm really distressed, and I'm looking through the car and looking through my pack 15 times as if that's going to make it materialize. But eventually I realized I must have left it back in that little slot canyon. Now, we weren't too far away, so I said to my friends, hey, we need to get in the car and go back down there because, you know, I've left my dark cloth. So we did that, and we got down there and went in, and I was just sure I was going to find it sitting in that little crevice on the wall. It hadn't been maybe an hour and a half or so, but sure enough, it was gone. You know, we were looking all around, just up and down that little slot canyon and all outside the entrance to it, thinking, well, maybe somebody, you know, thought it was lost and brought it and set it out near the entrance where it'd be easier for, you know, for the owner to find. But we looked all over the place and just wasn't there. So after a while, we just gave up and kept on photographing. And then later on, you know, maybe a few hours later, I thought, well, maybe somebody's grabbed the thing and is looking for the owner, and so let's go back and check and see if maybe they'd put it back. No joy. Anyway, we went to the place to eat lunch, and while we were there, we noticed a couple ladies who we had talked to in that slot canyon, and I started thinking about the timeline and realized that they had been in there after I had left, and so maybe they had seen this thing. So I told them the story and asked them about it, and they said, oh yeah, we saw this white cloth that sort of placed in a crevice on the wall, and then this other lady came up and she grabbed it off the wall, and she was going around asking everyone if this was theirs, is it yours, is it yours, and no one claimed it, and then she just walked out of the canyon with it. And of course, at this point, those two ladies, even though we'd talked to them, they didn't know that this thing was mine, so they didn't know to do anything. But at least it was interesting to sort of get that little bit of closure. So then I'm thinking, well, okay, she seemed like a good Samaritan. She was going around asking people, if it was theirs, and so I thought maybe she'd, be driving up and down Long Canyon just looking for photographers and asking, and of course, she never found us. But anyway, we went back again after talking to those two ladies. We went back again to check, and still no joy. And even the next day, we were going back to photograph in Long Canyon because the color was awesome in there, by the way, this year. So we went back again the next day and still nothing. I've had to use one of my jackets as a dark cloth, and that works just fine. All in all, if you had to lose a piece of gear, dark cloth's not a bad one to lose, like as opposed to a light meter or a focusing loop or something like that you really don't have a spare and can't replace. But the funny thing about this is that I have kind of a routine when I'm photographing, and that is after I packed it all up and I suited up with the backpack and tripod in hand, I always turn around and just look where I'd laid everything to see if I'd left anything. And for whatever reason, I didn't do that this time, and boy, it's really cost me. No idea why I didn't do that, but man, this is a cautionary tale, and it's, I'm reminding myself, even though I don't feel like I need reminded because it's just part of my routine, but it wasn't on this day. So just always look around after you pack up and see if you left anything. The thing that's really sort of galling about this is, not only just this lady, like, why would you walk off with a dark cloth? I mean, what possible good is this going to be for her? Unless she's a large format photographer. It's just crazy. It's a Darkroom Innovations focusing hood, and I can just order another one, but I do some serious modifications to this thing. It's got too much elastic for my camera. It kind of squeezes on the bellows too much. So I get in there very carefully and cut the threads and the way it was constructed, and I undo the elastic, and then I have Velcro sewed on in various places so that I can nicely drape it around the rear standard of my camera without putting too much pressure on it. So it's highly customized. I have to have someone do all that work. So that's the part that's kind of a hassle, but it can be recreated, and it's no big deal. First world problem, I know. Anyway, that's not something you expect to happen on a photo trip, but it just is a reminder to really pay attention to your gear and make sure you've got it with you every time you pack up, because you lose a piece and it can really impact your whole trip.